Hi, my name is Botond and this is a video in a series of videos on the 7 deadly sins of modernity. In this video we are going to be talking about spiritlessness. It's an idea that Kierkegaard uses to mean a state of being in which one is physically alive but spiritually dead. This is going to be a more somber video than the rest because to explain my ideas I'm going to be making reference to the Holocaust, a topic which deserves the utmost precision and respect to the source material. I hope I can do it justice. Elements of spiritlessness is associated with ideas of subjectivity and objectivity. If we are defined by a set of objective labels, by how much money we earn, by what clothing we wear, by what title we carry, well, that is not an inward sense of definition. Our physicality has a set of labels attached to it, but what does that mean about our soul, our spirit? There is no inwardness within us, no subjective sense of being. And so, I think many people go out and they'll buy a Supreme brand shirt, hoping that the brand will name them as well. If you examine art these days, art is much more about branding than about having a logos. The valuation of art is largely decided by the name associated with it, a grand artist, whether that be Picasso or Roy Lichtenstein. Let's examine what the Holocaust tried to accomplish. Primo Levi, who was an Italian chemist and a Jew who was taken to Auschwitz, wrote 2 very important accounts of his experiences. The first one being If This Is a Man, and the second one being The Drowned and the Saved. If This Is a Man, already from the title, is asking us, in fact, Primo Levi demands that we ask this question, whether the individuals whom he describes are still men, whether they are still human beings, whether the Nazi concentration camps have achieved their true purpose, which was not simply the extermination of physical beings, but the annihilation of their humanity. Primo Levi calls this a double annihilation. And the way they went about it, we can try to unpack. Firstly, individuals who were placed into the camps lost their names, lost their human names, and were labeled with a fact, a serial number written onto their arm. Already here we see the reduction of this beautifully complicated human being into a number, a fact. Furthermore, these individuals couldn't speak their mother tongues very often. These camps were like towers of Babel, post-Babel. The only language Primo Levi says that was understood, the universal language of the camps, was pain and violence, the most basic of our sensual feelings. Another way in which the Nazi camps were designed to annihilate their humanity and to rob these individuals of what made them sacred and inviolable in the first place was to make their work meaningless. These individuals were forced to work, and while often the factories did produce goods for the regime, very often they would be made to work on factories which never actually produced anything. Work which was meaningless, absurd, well, like Sisyphus, as we talked about in the last video. And I don't think we should imagine them happy. Punishment, too, was given to these individuals, to these inmates, based on a whim. And according to human nature, we are punished and instantly we look for a crime, we look for a way in which we acted out of order, and there was none. And you see, the punishment wasn't merely physical, it was spiritual, because by handing out punishment without any wrongdoing, you remove the capacity of these individuals to make sense of their surroundings. You remove all rationality from their daily proceedings. And we haven't even mentioned the most basic elements. They were underfed. They were made to fight for the basic amounts of food that they needed. They were deprived of basic human decencies and decorum. They were deprived of their privacy. They had to defecate publicly without any sense of decency, reducing them to animals, to cattle. We see here that the purpose of the Nazi camps wasn't merely their physical extermination, but the annihilation of their humanity, what made them sacred. Now, where am I going with this? There's a passage within Primo Levi's If This Is a Man, which for me at least is truly heartbreaking, heartbreakingly beautiful. At some point, he describes going back from the workplace towards camp, and him and another individual are walking back, and finally they manage to find a common language of sorts. And they've got about 20-30 minutes when they are free from the guards. And as they're walking, Primo Levi describes to this man the experience that he had while reading Dante. And he describes this passage about when Odysseus sails forth. And Levi is talking about this single phrase and all the beautiful meaning it has in Dante, how Dante is so magical because he manages to capture worlds of meaning in simple, elegant sentences. And so we set forth, and so we sailed forth. And Levi, you can feel his humanity returning. You can feel between these two individuals that they're trying to understand each other, that they believe that the other one has meaning to offer. And to me, this is a miracle. To me, this is one of the most beautiful things. The ability of humans to persevere, to endure, and to make a friend, even in the depths of hell. Now, why am I talking about this? I think in many ways, the essential points in which we fall victim to making our own lives less meaningful than they could be are similar in essence to how the Nazis tried to achieve that same goal. Obviously, the pain and the suffering that the inmates went through is millions of times worse than we could possibly imagine, and that there is no comparison in the quantity of it. But the quality of the ways in which we make our lives meaningful is similar to how the Nazis tried to exterminate that same meaning. If we reduce ourselves to labels, if our work becomes meaningless, if we do not develop a rich, meaningful, and vibrant language by which we can communicate, then we are depriving ourselves of our potential humanity, our potential to have an inwardly, subjectively defined being and meaning. And so we are making ourselves spiritless. And how do we counteract this? Well, we've seen Primo Levi's example, that even in the depths of hell, he managed to find and regain some parts of his humanity. He managed to make a friend. And so if he could do it there, then we've got absolutely no excuse for not doing it here. And so what we have to do is we have to try to find these points of beauty, points which make us swoon, I guess, things which we feel in our bones. We have to communicate it. We have to try to establish these relationships. We have to try to find subjective meaning for us, which defines us from within. We have to find work which is meaningful. Now finally, before I end this video, I'd like to summarize, I'd like to return to a point which I've been flirting with in the last couple of videos. And this is an idea of fear. The last couple of videos have been about how we orient ourselves, how we find subjective meaning, self-definition, objects worthy of our love. Now, all this can be a daunting task. We are not the great man which we read about. And so how do we overcome fears? Surely it is comfortable to be in our safe, established orders in life. How do we build up the courage to break forth? something which I read about is that the Spartans, in their central square, had a statue. This was their axis mundi. This was the center of their civilization, that which defined their essential spirit. Now, what was this statue to? Well, you think Spartans. Well, perhaps it was a statue to courage, to bravery, to strength. And no, it was a statue to fear. And this did not make much sense initially. But then as I thought about it more, it revealed a deep and wise sense. For what the Spartans realized is that what makes a man stand his ground as the enemy charges at him ferociously, what makes him stand and fight is not bravery, it is not courage, it is fear. It is simply realizing what one ought to be afraid of. What one ought to be afraid of is not getting hurt, not even dying in the battle. What one ought to be afraid of is that your family back at home is going to be unsafe if you don't do this. Is that your forefathers who could stand their ground were better men than you. The way to be brave is to prioritize your fears and discover what you ought to be afraid of. Now, to conclude this section of videos, what I want to say is that what we ought to be afraid of is staying inert, staying undefined. What we ought to be afraid of is living our lives fully without ever having lived. What we ought to be afraid of is being physically alive but spiritually dead, undefined, without love, without meaning.